Jackie. I'm the Makerspace Manager at Swarthmore College. Thank you for joining us for Jocelyn's Basics of Photography tutorial, well, webinar, sorry. Jocelyn is one of my Makerspace technicians, and she is an artist and has a variety of skills and talents and interests. So I'm very happy to have her here, and she's put some really great information together for you guys. So I am going to just kind of hang out on the sidelines and keep an eye on the chat. If anybody has a question on the sideline while Jocelyn is talking, I will try to keep an eye on that and answer that for you. Otherwise, I'll let Jocelyn take it over and and her kitten, and and you guys can. There will be an open question session at the end. So take it over, Jocelyn.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, I'm Jocelyn. I'm a sophomore. I've been doing photography for a little while. I've done both film and digital. Yeah, I've done darkroom work as well, but this is going to be mainly focused on digital photography. So here, let me pull up my slides. Okay, so everyone can see that? Okay, so I'm basically going to be going over the basic settings and how to use them within photography. So first, the common settings that your camera has. So most cameras will allow you to choose different modes for how you want to photograph things. So automatic is where the camera sets everything, your aperture, your shutter speed, does the exposure and everything for you. Manual is the exact opposite. It's where you have to manually set everything, and I'll go into more about what aperture, shutter speed, all that sort of stuff is. So the other modes are aperture priority, which is when the user of the camera sets the aperture, and then the camera chooses the correct shutter speed and other settings for the exposure. And then shutter priority is where the user sets the shutter speed, and then the camera sets the aperture and other settings. Some cameras also have a mode called programmed auto, where it sets shutter speed and aperture, but you can also like edit other settings. It really varies a lot by brand and camera though. So if you want to use programmed auto, you really have to look at what your camera does specifically. There's also, when you shoot, cameras have the option to save either raw images, JPEGs, or both. So raw images are all the information that the sensor within the camera picks up. So when you take a photo, the sensor is exposed to the light and the image, and so raw images are just that exposure from the sensor, and JPEGs are a compressed version that have some enhancement added to them by the camera. So they usually look better than the raw image, but they have less information. And so when you take just JPEGs, you lose some editing power that you would have from having raw images. Yeah, so it really depends on what you're doing, what you want to shoot. A lot of people, if they're just casually taking photographs, might use JPEGs because they don't need raw images and they take up more space. But if you're really into editing and post-processing, you want to have the option to use your raw images as well. So that's the just basic modes that you can put your camera in. So now here's a little diagram that I took of my camera. Every camera is going to be different, but this is a basic layout of what a DSLR camera might look like. So here on the left, there's the mode selection, and you can see there's TV, AV, auto, manual, etc. And then the on and off switch, and then scrolls to change things like the shutter speed. And then here's more. So there's a scroll for aperture and a little button that chooses autofocus or manual focus. I'll show the camera again before I talk about the specific settings. Yeah, so if you have an aperture priority, for example, you can then use the scroll that's labeled aperture/EV scroll, and it will change the aperture if you move that. So what is aperture? Aperture is how open the lens is. So as you can see in the diagram, the lens, the hole through which the light actually comes through, can change in size, and that's the aperture. So the smaller the number of the aperture, the larger the opening of the lens. seems kind of counterintuitive, but that's how it works. So as the aperture decreases and the opening gets smaller, the depth of field of the photo increases. You can see once again on the diagram. I'll talk more about depth of field in a few slides, but when there is a more open aperture, so a smaller number, there's less things within the photo that are in focus because there's a smaller depth of field. So as the aperture gets smaller or the number gets larger, you get more objects and area in focus within the photo. So here's an example. So depth of field is the distance within the photo where objects are in focus. So this is same subject for all three photos. I just changed the I just changed the aperture. So you can see on the first one on the left, the aperture is very small. So so you can see that everything from before the bowl to the edge of the table is sharp or in focus. And on the one with a moderate aperture, you can see that the bowl and the handle and everything are all in focus, but the edge of the table in the background becomes blurry. And for the final one, you can see that just the rim itself is in focus, and the bowl starts to get blurry on the I don't know what that's called. Yeah, I'm gonna call it a handle. It's not a handle, but yeah, so that starts to get blurry a lot earlier. So you can see that it has a decreased depth of field within the photo. So yeah, less things are in focus or within the range in which they are sharp. Also, if people need me to, I know I talk fast when I'm nervous, so if people need me to slow down my talking, I can. I'm trying to not talk too fast.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, you can interject, but she's going to go over some more stuff and be a little more in depth as she goes on. So
yeah, I just don't want to get too technical and confuse people or make it like overly complicated. So shutter priority mode. So as I said before, shutter priority mode is when you set the shutter speed and then the camera sets the aperture and other features. So here on my camera, shutter priority mode is TV, and then this scroll up here is the scroll that you use to change your shutter speed. So shutter speed is simply how quickly the camera opens and closes the shutter. So when the shutter is open for longer, more light is let into the camera, and this creates a brighter exposure. But it also means that if you have moving subjects, that the camera will see them both at the beginning and ending of their movement. So here I was photographing my sister's cat for this. So you can see how he is blurry when he was moving because the camera was open enough to catch him both when his head was in one position and in the other position. So you get the blur around his face. And with a faster shutter speed of 1/400th of a second, the shutter opened and closed quickly enough that it just captured one motion. And so you don't end up with the blur anymore. Oh. And so, yeah, sometimes motion blur is desirable. Some people try to have motion blur. Here's an example of a photo that has more motion blur. So you can see at 1/125th of a second, the moth was moving so fast that its wings just end up completely blurry. Some people like motion blur for things like photographing cars or animals or other things moving quickly. It's really personal if you want something that's motion blurry. If you're trying to get sharp images, like if you're taking a portrait of someone and you want them to just look like they're sitting still, you probably want faster shutter speeds unless they are like really able to stand still. Yeah, so you can definitely find just examples of motion blur if you just look it up, or you probably are all seen it before. So yeah, that's a result of having slower shutter speeds. So Next thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is exposure value. So exposure value is an edit that the camera makes to the lightness of the image. So like how long it's exposed for, or like how much it looks like it's been exposed. So on my camera, exposure value you control by hitting this little button that has the plus and the minus, and then the same scroll that changes the aperture becomes the exposure value scroll when you click the exposure value button. So yeah, so I think a lot of cameras have a feature like this where the same scroll or button will control multiple things depending on what setting is selected or activated. So EV value is pretty easy to use. You just change the EV value, and negative EV values will create darker photos while positive values will increase the brightness of the photo. So it's really good for if you're like photographing something that's a really bright day and you look at the photo that you just took and it's just way too bright and overexposed, then you can use your EV value to make it darker. Same goes for if you're photographing a dimmer scene and you need more light, then you can just use the EV value for lightening the photo. So yes, this is the same exact photo. This is the same exact photo with both are negative, but one is significantly more negative. So you can see that it produces a lot darker of an image. Some cameras also have a feature called bracketing, where you can choose 3 exposure values, a range, like, and when you take the photo, it takes 3 of the exact same images with the 3 different exposure values. So that's actually what I did here is, this is 2 of the exposure values from a bracket that I did. Not all cameras have this, but a lot of, I think, newer DSLRs do. So yeah, that's a good feature if you have it and you don't know what exposure value you need. You can use the bracketing, and then you can go back and look at your photos and see which one is closest to the exposure that you want. So here's another example photo combining all the things I just talked about. So you can see here, this is the cat again. At 1/640th of a second, he is pretty sharp, even though he's moving. He's still in focus, he's not blurry. It has a pretty open aperture, so you can see that his face is basically in focus, and the things around it pretty quickly. You can see his body and the background get out of focus pretty quickly because it has a really shallow depth of field. And I used a -1 exposure value on this photo because it was really bright where the light from the door was coming in, and not putting the exposure value down left me with an image where the white on the door and the cat were too bright and looked overexposed. So that's an example of how all those things play together. So a lot of it is just learning it is trial and error and figuring out what works, because everything's going to affect the other things. If you have a faster shutter speed, you're going to want, and you're trying to get the same exposure, you're going to want a more open aperture, which then affects the depth of field. Things like that. If you're shooting on a really, really bright day and want, for whatever reason, a long exposure, then you're probably going to have to close your aperture a lot, or else you'll get too much light. So all the settings really interact with each other a lot. Another thing that cameras do is they have ISO. ISO values depend on the light within the environment where you're photographing. So higher ISO values are used to capture images in darker environments, but typically as an ISO value gets higher, the image quality itself will degrade or get, a lot of times images will get noisier. And what it means when an image is noisy is that it has, it looks almost kind of grainy in the background when you zoom in. You can see kind of like, yeah, it looks kind of grainy. You can see like all the different, like where the colors change pretty easily. It doesn't look smooth anymore. So cameras usually have the option to manually set an ISO value or set a range of ISO values, and then the camera will choose for each individual photo within that range. So this is the same space, but one during the day and one at night. You can see in the day when there's light coming in the windows and I'm facing the window, the ISO is only at 200, and the ISO for at night when there's only like a little bit of light and there's no natural light is 10,000, which is really high for an ISO. You can also see a little bit from looking at the images that I don't know how well the images come across on Zoom, but at least from my perspective, you can see that in the background of the image with a lower ISO, even though like the woods and everything outside are out of focus, they look less grainy than the background of, they look less fuzzy, I guess is a better word, than the background of the photo of the hands, where you can kind of see a little bit how, like looking at the edges, how they're kind of very fuzzy from the ISO being so high.
It's almost like a speckling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what ISO does. And some cameras are a lot better in ISO than other cameras. So that really, it also depends. Yeah, so some cameras will photograph darker environments better. And so if you're like looking to buy a camera or something and you know you're gonna be doing a lot of photographing dark environments, then you might want to look at cameras that have good ISO and have reviews that say they're good at processing high quality images in the dark. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing is metering. So when the camera takes a photo, the meter tries to expose for a middle gray value. So this becomes a problem when taking photos that don't have a lot of middle values. So in my middle value, I mean on like a scale of like white to black, like a gray scale, like if you were to convert your color image into that, the middle gray would be the middle gray value. So when photos don't have a lot of middle value, you may have to adjust the exposure yourself to compensate for the metering. So the example that Jackie gave me earlier was if you're taking a photo of something with a lot of snow, and you let the camera take the photo, it might turn out gray because the camera exposes all the white as a gray value because that's what it's looking for. So the example I have here is photographing these mountains with the clouds. And when I wasn't messing with the exposure value and setting the exposure for myself, it created the clouds as the middle gray. And so that ended up with the mountains being way darker than they should have been. And so I had to go in and change the exposure myself to get it so that the clouds were white instead of gray, and that it allowed for the mountains to be light enough and that you could see them. So that's an example of metering. So white balance is another setting of the camera that can really affect the way that your image looks. So white balance controls the color cast of an image, and there are different types of white balance, and that the camera will automatically add, as well as manual control. So most cameras, you can set it to be an automatic white balance, and it will try and figure out what the environment you're in is, and then it will set the white balance accordingly. There are also specific settings a lot of cameras have. So you can set it for, let's say, daylight, and it will usually add, I think, warm tones because daylight light is very blue. And you can look up charts of this and it will just tell you what the different settings typically do. So here on the bottom, I have an example of a photo I took with an auto white balance, where the camera was trying to set it to look like, basically what the camera's trying to do with white balance is get the white in real life to look white in the photograph. So that's the auto white balance. And then the other photo I took was with tungsten, which is a, I believe, common white balance filter, which adds cool tones to the photo. And so the reason I switched to tungsten in this scenario was I was trying to get it to look grayer just for mood purposes. but it's really, once again, it's a personal preference thing. And I changed it to tungsten in this case because of mood, not because it was giving me a more accurate photo. So, Jackie, are you gonna say something? Oh no, okay.
You're touching on it, so.
Yeah, so white balance can really change the way your photo looks. So here are this is the same photo, and I did 3 different white balances. So the one in the center with the temperature of 640, 90, 640, whatever. Anyway, the one in the center is the auto white balance that the camera said. And then the 2 on the sides, I went into a editing software and I changed the white balance myself to show how much it really can affect it. So the lower the number, the cooler the temperature, and the higher the number, the warmer the temperature of that it applies to the image. So it basically can apply like a color filter to your image. It can really just completely change the way it looks. If your white balance is off, you can end up with like people looking green because it adds too much cool to the photo.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's kind of designed to help compensate for the different colors of light that you have depending on your environment. So in some environments you have fluorescent light, which is a very different color tone than say tungsten light or daylight. And so it's just kind of an important thing to be aware of. Most cameras are pretty good at picking up what type of light you're in. So if you have it set on auto white balance, it's usually okay. But if you're doing something really specific, or you need to, or maybe you take the photo and you go back and check it and it seems a little too cool or a little too warm, the white balance is where you want to go to adjust it.
Yeah, no, I've had scenarios before where I've looked at photos, like photographing things in the fall, I think is when I've most found that I've gone and changed the white balance on my camera, because want things to look warmer with like the leaves and stuff like that. Was a personal thing, but I found that I've changed the white balance a lot for that, where I've looked at photos and gone, it's too cool in tone, I want it to be more reds and warmer. Okay, so getting more into the artistic aspect of it, you can use the settings within your camera to really change the way that your photos look, and are not just from like, is it not blurry, is it exposed properly, but in an artistic manner. So composition, you could teach a whole class on composition, but the basic definition for it for us is how elements are arranged within the image. And so I think a lot of times people think of composition as just where things are placed, like objects, but it also pertains to the color, the contrast, the light and dark within the image. And so here I have 2 photos of the same leaf, but with just a simple adjustment of the angle at which it was photographed and the focus within the photo that really changes the way it looks. So on the one on the right, because it is focused on the leaf and because it is angled in that manner, you get the like horizon that becomes kind of fuzzy, and the leaf becomes very sharp and focused, and sticks out more, I think, a lot more than in the left one, where the focus isn't 100% on the leaf, and it doesn't really have the blur and everything that the other one does, and they have the same aperture. So it's not a manner of the depth of field being different. It's just different. It's a matter of the composition and the angle at which the leaf was photographed. So yeah, that's just an example of how composition can really change the way a photograph looks. So depth of field, using a shallow depth of field is pretty common for making like something pop out or creating a like more textured looking background. So here are some of the cherry trees that's worth more that I photographed last year. And because the aperture is so stopped down, is so wide open, you just get the only thing in focus are the cherry blossoms on the end of the stem, and everything else is out of focus. And so that's like where the attention is drawn, is to those individual flowers. Also because the aperture is so wide open, in this photo, the shutter speed is really fast, which was helpful on this day because it was windy. And if that shutter speed wasn't that fast, then the cherry blossoms were just moving too much. It also was a really low ISO because it was so sunny and bright out that day. Yeah.
So it also helped you with the meter too, right? Because having the aperture open so wide let so much light in that turning up your shutter speed to a much faster shutter speed helped kind of like not overexpose the image too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So it wasn't blown out or anything.
That. Yeah, and it helped you capture it even though the branch was moving.
Yeah. So yeah, no, the shutter speed was able to be faster, which was really good for that scenario. Yeah. So another thing that is an artistic aspect of it is bokeh. So bokeh is from when the camera processes out of focus light, and it usually presents as circles, but it also can be hexagonal. This depends on the lens. So on the left, I have an example of bokeh that is more hexagon shaped. That's just because of the lens. So bokeh is obtained when the aperture is low or open, because the light if the aperture is more open, the depth of field is shorter, and then there's more light in the background that is out of focus. So if you have your aperture really closed or at a really high number value, then you're not going to have much out of focus light, so it's not likely that you're going to get bokeh. And so yeah, so I find most often I get bokeh in scenarios with things like leaves and light coming in through trees is a really common way. Another common way is lights like string lights in the background or lighting fixtures in the far away. So the portrait is the bokeh is coming from lighting fixtures in the background that were out of focus. Yeah. And here's another example that has a lot of bokeh and is a very circular bokeh. So this is at 1/80th of a second, so it's a pretty slow shutter speed. It wasn't windy when I took this. If it were windy, it probably would have been a different shutter speed needed. The aperture is 5.6, so that's pretty open, and it's a -1 exposure value on this image. Yeah, so with the aperture being that open, you can see that it's just basically the fence post, the gate post, and then the leaves directly next to it that are in focus. Looking at the front of the image, all the like things in the front are out of focus or blurry. You can see like the vines go from being out of focus to being in focus as you move backwards into the image, which is a result of the depth of field being shallow. Yeah. Okay, so that was a lot of information. So if anyone has any questions, anything they'd like me to elaborate on, any more examples of things they want to see, just let me know. Now is the time. Kathy, did you raise your hand, or was that
me unmuted? Okay, yeah.
You're unmuted now.
You know how you were saying about taking the snow and you have to let more light in because it's a middle tone gray? Like you would actually have to let more light in, like compensate for the exposure?
No, I think you would have to light. Yeah.
You let more light in, but so the exposure value, you wouldn't know that until you already took the picture, and then that would do that for you, I guess?
So
I've never played with the exposure value, but I've seen it on the camera. So
Yeah, so the exposure value.
Can you walk Kathy through how you take a meter reading in order to gauge what the exposure is
I
going to
know
be?
how to do that. So I just don't know, like, is it this, does the exposure value do the exact same thing as bracketing? Like, does it do it for you? Like it guesses like a higher or lower?
So exposure value, so bracketing is something that uses exposure value. So bracketing is when the camera takes takes the photo at 3 different exposures usually. Exposure value, just instead of taking it at different exposures, it just takes it at a brighter or darker exposure depending on how you change the exposure value.
So when you took the picture of Wharton and it was too dark, then you just pushed it to go up, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So like if I were taking a photo of something, I take it, I look at the camera, I look at my photo, I see that's way too dark.
Right.
Then I would go and I would push the exposure value up. And then I would take more photos.
Okay.
And so yeah, it's just a matter of seeing what works for the particular environment that you're in.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
So it picks if it's the aperture or the shutter. So it picks if it's like when it does that, is it that slowing down the, I'll play with it, but is it slowing down the, it's choosing whether it's slowing down the shutter or opening?
I actually don't know.
Okay.
I'm going to be honest. I've always known exposure value as like something that you apply to it. I'm going to be honest, I don't know how the camera mechanism works when you change the exposure value.
Oh, I'll play around with it. I always saw that button. I had no idea what it was for. So.
Yeah. I don't know if it actually changes your shutter speed or if it just applies a different post-processing thing. I was never sure of that.
Yeah. Do you use it a lot?
Yeah, I use it a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. I find it really helpful for tweaking things pretty easily.
I have a question. What do you have any camera recommendations or like stuff to look for when buying a camera for someone who has never really done too much photography, but is interested in getting one?
I'm lucky because my dad does photography and has been doing it his whole life, so he's really invested. So I guess I personally use Pentax cameras just because that's what my dad has used his whole life. I know one thing that he likes about them is that their lenses are all interchangeable. So if you have like multiple lenses, you can use basically any Pentax lens dating back to like their film cameras before it was even, their film cameras, and you can put them on their digital cameras. I know that's one thing that's pretty nice about it is having cross compatibility. I don't know that much about Canon and Nikon as major, like the more major brands. That would be one thing that I would look for is if you buy one of their camera bodies, can you use most of their lenses on it, or do you have to buy within the specific series that it is? I guess another thing is mirrorless versus mirrored cameras. Mirrorless cameras are smaller than mirrored cameras, but I think depending on who you talk to, some people think they lose some of the capabilities. So that would be something to research whether or not you want a mirrored or a mirrorless camera. And so I would say look into that, and then that can be a big limiter on what you buy. I like having a viewfinder a lot. I'd say get a camera with a viewfinder. My first camera only had a screen to look at. It didn't have anywhere you could actually look through. So you had to look at the screen while you shot. And the problem was that when you shoot in really bright situations and you can't see the screen, you can't see what you're doing. So I would say get a camera with a viewfinder. I don't know that much about beginner cameras. Jackie, do you have any?
I think most DSLRs are pretty good for beginners. I think one thing to maybe look into is the sensitivity of the sensor or the sensor card. So I would assume that the more sensitive one of the cards is you'd probably get more information and better quality images. Yeah, I've had a DSLR sitting around in my house for a long time that I've used occasionally, but I haven't had a need to do a lot of shopping myself. So yeah, sorry about.
No worries.
Yeah. No, there's like a lot of, it gets really complex. My dad tries to talk to me about it, and sometimes I just get a little lost because there's a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, there's a ton
size.
of different stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah, sensor size makes a lot of difference, I know, in like the quality of the images. Like big professional photographers use those huge cameras because they're full frame. They're not cropped. So, but if you're not doing professional photography, you probably want a cropped camera, but
Yeah.
just the smaller the sensor, I think the less information it takes in, I believe is the thing. So you get less detail and less capabilities. But yeah, if you're just trying to do it casually, I don't think you need to go too crazy.
no, of course not. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions?
John,
Anybody have uses of their camera that they, or any projects that they're doing with the camera specifically, or
yeah, I see that John Word raised their hand.
Hi, yes. I just
Hi,
wanted to
John.
mention, hello, that Media Services has a collection of lenses available for student checkout, and I believe they're all Canon.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to experiment with different types of lenses, they're a good resource because you can find a whole variety.
Yeah, and they are super helpful. They're a great resource, and they would be great for any sort of more in-depth questions that you have.
Yeah, I guess that's another thing to consider. If you're using more popular brands, you might have more access to if you're using a service like the Media Center has Canon because it's a more major brand. So yeah, might be easier to get, to like get things lended or that sort of thing. Yeah.
Does everyone kind of understand what Jocelyn explained in terms of the exposure and how the meter works and stuff like that? Does anyone need a refresher on anything?
Yeah, and everything that I talked about, you can pretty easily find diagrams and examples online. It's really easy to just look up like different white balance examples and like look at a range of photos with different white balances, that sort of thing. A lot of people have made diagrams and tutorials and online stuff about it.
Yeah, I recommend sort of going out and taking a little log with you and, picking a scene or something you want to photograph, and then trying a lot of different settings and keeping sort of a little journal of the settings that you have for the same image, so that when you go back and look at it, you can see how different settings will affect.
Yeah, I don't know if this is an all camera thing, but a lot of, at least my camera and other cameras that I've worked with, the image itself and the data has the settings that you used, and you can use a lot of like post-processing or editing apps and features will allow you to look at the settings. So that's how I got what the aperture and exposure value and everything on all the photos I had were, because they were embedded in the image, and I could bring up the image properties.
Okay, last call for questions. Anybody? Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jocelyn, for our photography basics. I hope this gave everyone a little bit of a better understanding of how a DSLR works. And there's one of the great opportunities right now with the time that we have is we can have a reason to go outside and take some pictures. So thank you for this webinar, Makerspace photography part of forward to seeing you guys in our future webinars.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.